The US economy dipped in the first quarter of 2022. Many are asking, is a recession looming? Hello, I'm Owen and this is The Heat. The US midterm elections are just over 4 months away, and a host of factors will play a key role in determining the future of US President Joe Biden's legislative agenda. Among them, the January 6th hearings into former President Donald Trump's alleged attempts to nullify the results of the 2020 election, the US Supreme Court ruling on abortion, and headwinds in the US economy. We begin with this report from CGTN's Owen Fairclough.
For the pessimists, the third and final update for the first quarter's economic output is a sign of a recession looming. After surging nearly 7% at the end of 2021, GDP for the first 3 months of this year contracted 1.6%, the second time it's been downgraded. And those pessimists include the International Monetary Fund.
There is a narrowing path to avoiding a recession in the US.
But both consumer spending and business investment rose in the first quarter, so the numbers are more complex than they appear. And they help optimists argue the economy is fundamentally strong. The trade deficit, that's the US importing more than it exports, was largely to blame for sending that first quarter GDP figure into reverse. But the US is nevertheless mired in a global inflation crisis, and that's forcing the central bank to aggressively raise its benchmark interest rate in order to tighten financial conditions. And that in turn is raising fears that a recession, typically defined by 2 back-to-back quarters of negative growth, is now unavoidable in order to tame those price rises, which continue to rise. The American Farm Bureau Federation estimates the cost of an Independence Day celebration barbecue for millions of US households will be 17% higher compared to last year. And while the official figure for second quarter GDP isn't out for another month, the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta's real-time tracker suggests the US is already on the brink of a recession. Owen Fairclough, CGTN, Washington.
To discuss this and more, let's bring in our guests. Joining us from Wilmington, Delaware, is Brandon Brice. He is a columnist and radio host of the Brice Is Right. Here in Washington, D.C., Joseph Williams is a former U.S. News and World Report senior editor. From Cleveland, Ohio, we are joined by Jessie Hill. She is a professor of law at Case Western Reserve University. And from Bethesda, Maryland, Amin Mohseni is an assistant professor of economics at American University and a macroeconomist at the Atlantic Council. Welcome to all of you. Amin Mohseni, we just heard the U.S. economy dipped by 1.6% in the first quarter of this year. The chairman of the Federal Reserve in the United States, Jerome Powell, he says that the U.S. economy is in strong shape, quote unquote, and a recession can be avoided, but it's going to be difficult. What is your view on where the economy is heading?
Well, I would agree with Chairman Powell because the unemployment rate is at historically low levels at 3.6%. But on the other hand, the inflation is high. So it's a very complex picture, as you just mentioned. The Fed, to address the inflation, is going to increase the rates up to 3.4% by the end of 2022. That's a very aggressive rate hike. And I think that is definitely going to put the U.S. economy at the higher risk of recession, if not in recession already. And in the past, if you look at historical data over the past 50 years, anytime the Fed has tried to reduce inflation rate by more than 2 or 3%, the economy has gone into recession. So the chances of recession are very high, and that's what makes the job of the Fed a lot harder. With low unemployment rates and high inflation rate, they have to address this inflation very quickly.
Right, and I mean, to what extent will the recovery be dependent on, or rather affected by, some factors that may be beyond the control of the United States? I'm thinking of things like a stable oil price for one, and the conflict in Ukraine for another.
Certainly, the factors that are out of control, supply chain disruptions because of the COVID pandemic, are still continuing, and that has been exacerbated by the war in Ukraine, certainly. Therefore, the higher oil prices, higher food prices is going to make the job again a lot harder. And there is no sign of the war ending anytime soon. And the sanctions are just being ratcheted up by the US and G7 allies. So the higher oil prices and higher food prices are going to be a strong headwind against the Fed in trying to control inflation moving forward.
Brandon, Brice, in addition to the conflict in Ukraine, as we just heard, the US has also fallen victim, of course, to supply chain bottlenecks, and we've seen the inflation rate go up to 40-year highs. But the country continues to spend tens of billions of dollars on buying weapons for Ukraine for that conflict. It continues to also spend money on food shortages that have been caused in part by the conflict as well. Where do you see it going?
Well, unfortunately, I don't see it getting better. I mean, now you're talking about things such as milk and bacon are $10 and $12. And so, again, when you're talking about the election, no one cares about what's happening in Ukraine when they've got to buy baby formula and they can't get access to it. So I think the administration very seriously and very quickly needs to decide how to turn this inflation numbers around, because even though we're at low numbers at 3 to 4%, when you look at are Americans doing better than they were 4 years ago, there's a big question mark that possibly says no.
The administration continues to print money, Brandon. To what extent is this contributing to the inflation rate that we're seeing right now?
It's very simple. The more that you can't keep spending money, and none of that is actually coming back into the U.S. economy. The other thing is, when you look at industries are now being severely impacted when you're starting to look at industries that want to keep those jobs here in the United States. And so inflation is one big issue. But then the other thing is, you've got to look at other things that impact the economy, like the war in Ukraine, like oil prices, which right now they're outrageous. And so, again, inflation and oil, most Americans are looking at their pocketbooks. They're not thinking about the impact that this had possibly through and because of Ukraine.
Joseph Williams, how do these economic woes factor into President Biden's very low approval ratings right now and into the fortunes, I guess, of the Democrats in the upcoming midterm elections? Joseph Williams, can you hear me? No, I'm afraid we've lost Joseph Williams for the moment there. Amin Mohseni, I want to get back to you on one of the issues that our reporter raised in his report when he was talking about the deficit, and that's the import-export picture for the United States. How does that change?
When you increase the interest rates, the U.S. dollar is going to get stronger, of course, because there's more capital is going to flow inside the U.S. economy. As U.S. dollar becomes stronger vis-a-vis other currencies and trade partners, the U.S. exports are going to become more expensive. Therefore, it's going to exacerbate the trade deficit that U.S. is already facing. So moving forward, we would expect that if the Fed continues with the rate hikes, and if other economies around the world do not follow suit, capital is going to flow into the U.S., making U.S. dollars stronger, reducing exports compared to imports inside the U.S., and therefore trade deficit increasing moving forward.
Jessie Hill, great to have you on the show. Welcome to the program. I want to move to what's been going on at the United States Supreme Court, a major ruling from that court overturning federal abortion rights. This is a reversal of the original Roe versus Wade ruling, which was handed down in 1973. The current ruling is at odds with public opinion, but what kind of political fallout do you think there will be?
Well, I think this is a real wild card, and I'm not sure anybody knows what the impact is going to be. The decision was certainly wildly unpopular. It has made the Supreme Court's approval rating drop, that along with some other controversial rulings. But I think whether that opinion gap or that trend continues into the November elections is anyone's guess. And whether people come out to vote on this issue in particular is also a big question mark.
Jessie, there have also been concerns being expressed by people who say that, look, if the Supreme Court, the US Supreme Court, can do this to something that's been in place for almost 50 years, then what stops them from doing it to other legislation that's been in place for a long time as well?
That's right. And that is certainly one of the questions that's preoccupying a lot of folks right now. The Supreme Court tried to say we are only talking about abortion in this decision. We're not talking about any of the other cherished rights that Americans have, like access to contraception, right to marry who you want. But the logic of the court's opinion certainly suggested that those rights were not safe either. And there was even a concurring opinion by Justice Clarence Thomas suggesting that it was time for the court to reconsider those precedents.
Do you think, I mean, how does the Democrat Party respond to this? Do they have any or many options?
You know, there's not a whole lot that can be done at the national level to respond to this decision. You know, the president himself is pretty limited in his options, what he can do on his own. And then the problem for the Democrats is that if they pass legislation to try to protect or codify abortion rights in the U.S. nationwide, you know, they face a filibuster from the Republicans, and that legislation is never going to pass. And then even if it did, it would end up undoubtedly getting challenged and end up before the exact same U.S. Supreme Court that overturned Roe v. Wade.
Well, I'm glad to tell you that Joseph Williams is now back with us. Great to have you back with us, Joseph. We were talking about the economy earlier on, and I was wondering, how do these economic woes that the Biden administration is facing now factor into his very low approval ratings on the one hand, and into, on a broader basis, into the fortunes for the Democrat Party with the elections coming up in November?
Well, first, apologies for my disappearing act, but I think they very much factor in. You've got a president who's deeply underwater. I mean, even Donald Trump had numbers that were slightly better than these at times in the midterms. And it's very much an issue because it's a tale of two economies. You have, on the one hand, the numbers, which indicate that the economy, the U.S. economy is very robust, that the economy is strong, people are still buying things, jobs are getting easier to fill, and we have an economy that looks like it's chugging along, but at the same time, people are not feeling good. And President Biden tried to express empathy with that, and he's tried a number of different levers to reverse that feeling, that negative feeling that people have, and yet gas prices are still pretty high. Groceries are more expensive than they've been in several years. And the economy is really something that the president himself, during good times, presidents get a lot of credit for good economies and boom times, and a lot of blame for bad times, even though they have very little control over either scenario.
And as we just heard from our reporter, this year's July 4th barbecue is going to cost 17% more. Joseph, one other thing is, do you think the Democrats could be helped electorally to some extent by what was a very unpopular decision taken by the U.S. Supreme Court on abortion rights?
They could. The question is, are they going to weaponize it and use it as a cudgel against Republican candidates, and is it going to resonate? Some of the reports that I've been hearing lately are a lot of Democrats are frustrated that the Democrats themselves, when they had power, when they had a supermajority under President Obama during his first term and a clear majority under President Biden in his first term, did not act to codify Roe ahead of this. The problem there is you have two Democrats who are very much against getting rid of the filibuster, which would have allowed them to do that. And they fear that retribution is coming when the Republicans, or if the Republicans get enough seats to regain power in Congress. So there's a lot of anger out there. If the Democrats can harness it to their favor at the ballot box, it will definitely become a winning issue. The challenge is doing that in a way that does not turn off moderates, that does not alienate further their own voters who are suspicious of them having done nothing for the past 10 to 12 years.
Okay, Brendan, Brice, let's move on to the January 6th hearing, so-called because of the events that took place on Capitol Hill last year on that date. Now, the hearings are dominated by the Democrat Party, although there are two Republicans on that committee. It announced a star witness this week, Cassidy Hutchinson, who is a former aide to President Trump's chief of staff when he was president. His chief of staff at that time was Mark Meadows. Let's listen to some of what Cassidy Hutchinson had to say.
I was in the vicinity of a conversation where I overheard the president say something to the effect of, you know, I don't effing care that they have weapons. They're not here to hurt me. Take the effing mags away. Let my people in. They can march to the Capitol from here. Let the people in. Take the effing mags away.
So, Brendan, was this the blockbuster testimony that it was billed to be?
I don't think so. As a matter of fact, I think that the Democrats have really played this out. Was it unfortunate? Absolutely. Was it un-American? Absolutely. But again, there are much pressing issues that are impacting Americans, such as high inflation, such as gas prices, such as paying at the pump, and such as groceries. That's going to be the main focus for most voters in November. The January 6th narrative. I think what's happened is that the Democrats thought that this was going to create much more of a opportunity for them, and what we've seen is that it really hasn't. Most Americans can't even tell you the full what actually happened in January 6th. I think moving forward now, it's going to come down to can the president convince the nation that the economy is on the right track? That's what most people care about, not January 6th.
Amin Mohseni, what did you make of the hearings, given, as Brandon just told us, that the country is beset by a host of other problems which affect people very personally?
Certainly. The consumer sentiment index is at historically low levels these days. And people are facing mortgage rates at above 6% right now, credit card interest rates of 20% or so. So I think households moving forward are going to think about cutting back spending. Firms are going to think about cutting back on investment and hiring. And therefore, that looming recession or that bad economic conditions in the future, I think that's going to weigh a lot heavier on midterm elections than what's happening right now regarding January 6th or regarding the Supreme Court decision. So I think we know this as a fact that Americans vote at the pump and they vote by their pockets, and things are not looking good for Democrats right now.
So fair to say then, I mean, that this is not going to change voter behavior or choices in a significant way, either in November or even 2 years down the line, more than 2 years down the line in the 2024 election.
That would be my prediction. Yes.
Jessie Hill, what we heard from Cassidy Hutchinson was largely hearsay. I mean, if you look at the language she was using, she was talking about she overheard something and she thought that this was going to have the effect of certain things. I mean, when one hears terminology like that, can this hearing have much validity?
Oh, well, this is not a court of law, after all. And even in a court of law, hearsay can sometimes be admissible if it's reliable. I mean, my sense of her testimony was that she was a very compelling witness. She was clearly very much in the room where it happened throughout this process, and had a lot of insider knowledge and spoke very clearly and articulately about it. So, I think unless more information comes out that makes us really question the veracity of what she said, I think it really hit home. And I do question whether people are watching the hearings who are not already sort of persuaded, who are not already sympathetic to the Democrats' project here. But if people are watching, I think it has been truly fascinating and really compelling TV, honestly.
So what kind of effect, Jessie, do you think it's going to have on President Trump and what many people believe is will be his next bid for the White House?
Well, I think it comes down partly, at least, to whether or not the Justice Department is going to charge him with any crimes coming out of this, the various revelations here. I think that could really impact his 2024 prospects. And I think after the hearings are over, all eyes are going to be on the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, to see what he does with all this information.
Brandon, Brice, do you think the president will be charged?
No. I think this is another failed play, unfortunately, by the Democrats. Going back to your abortion question, though, I actually think, believe it or not, the Supreme Court gave the Democrats and the Biden presidency, gave them life again. So now the question is, how are the Democrats going to utilize this abortion issue and really define what it is throughout the states to use that in November? November will be the thing to tell us if there will be a Biden re-election or if we're getting a new Republican president in 2024.
And when you say, former President Trump will not be affected in any significant way by these hearings, is it because there is not much of a legal basis to them, or is it because of the political risks inherent in charging him?
I think both. I think right now you've got a country, ironically, the more that the Democrats continue to push this, the stronger they keep the president's name out there. The reality is that they want Trump to go away. All they have to do is remain silent on it. What we're seeing is that Republicans are now saying, you know what, we're ready to move on from Trump. So the more that they push his name and continue to promote the Trump presidency, the stronger they actually make Donald Trump. If they want to get rid of Trump, stop talking about him.
Judge Williams, there's one other. Sorry, you want to say something?
I think that's very curious logic. I mean, you are talking about what was a deadly insurrection. You are talking about people who lost their lives here. You're talking about the United States democracy that was hanging by a thread at one point. And I think that people are paying attention. Now, are they paying attention while they're filling their tanks up with gas and shopping on eBay? I doubt that. I mean, people are engaged, however, and I think that this is resonating. One thing you've got to keep in mind, however, is what the previous point was made, that this is largely, or in a large part, for an audience of one, and that audience is Merrick Garland. And I think he's got some very real decisions to make. And just last week, ahead of another hearing, some raids were conducted at the offices of Trump lawyers, including Jeffrey Clark. There have been some very striking testimony about people who say that they were not convinced that the peaceful transfer of power would happen. And you have some Republicans who are starting to get a little squeamish, including people who are submitting evidence to the committee while it starts. People have the same kind of reaction and sort of questions about whether or not Watergate was penetrating and whether or not people over the long hot summer of August 1974 were paying attention to what was going on over there. And I can definitely tell you history has proven that they did. And the people who are paying most attention probably aren't the ones who are in the hinterlands, but are the people in the Republican Party and in the Justice Department. And I think that's ultimately where the fate of this will lie.
Judge, I will play you another excerpt from Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony. Let's listen to this.
The president said something to the effect of, "I'm the effing president, take me up to the Capitol now." To which Bobby responded, "Sir, we have to go back to the West Wing." The president reached up towards the front of the vehicle to grab at the steering wheel.
Now, the Bobby that Cassidy Hutchinson was referring to there is the Secret Service agent who was protecting the president at that time. And that was very dramatic testimony. But late on Tuesday afternoon, the White House correspondent for the United States network, NBC, reported that Secret Service agents, or reported that he was told by a senior member of the Secret Service who said that Secret Service agents who were with the president are prepared to testify that Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony is not actually what happened. What do you make of that? And will that hurt the credibility not just of the witness, but also of the committee as well?
It's interesting. It remains to be seen. It's easy to say that she wasn't telling the truth to a reporter, but if they do get up in front of the committee and raise their hand and swear to tell the truth, then it becomes a much more problematic thing to say that she wasn't telling the truth. Or
I don't think they are alleging that she wasn't telling the truth. I think what they are saying, and there was a clarification by that very reporter on Twitter, in which he said that what these agents are saying was that yes, the president was irate, but it didn't go up to the level of him attacking the agents or grabbing the steering wheel of the car.
Sure, I think the point still remains the same. Yes, it would indicate her testimony, but there's a lot more evidence from a lot more quarters that indicate that the January 6th thing was a fait accompli and the president knew what was going down. I mean, we're setting aside the testimony that said people were arriving at the Capitol armed. We're setting aside the testimony that people said that Trump, that very many people, including some members of the Trump family, said that the president said Mike Pence should in fact be hanged. So there's a lot more evidence than just Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony that can rest on whether or not President Trump would be charged criminally. I mean, these are the most salacious details and the ones that indicate that the president, if it did happen, was unhinged at that point, which would lend a lot of credence to some other things that went on that day. But I think there's more evidence than just this one day of testimony to be considered, and there's probably more to come.
Jessie,
I have to agree with that. And I think that, you know, she painted a very complete picture of a president who was completely unhinged. And I think, you know, if all you've got is to quibble with certain details here and there, that's really not a very strong rebuttal of that picture.
But if there is just a small element of doubt over this, Jessie, wouldn't it affect all her testimony?
Not necessarily. Again, I mean, they weren't really, as you noted, going to the truth of what she was saying. They weren't saying that her entire narrative around what happened in those days surrounding January 6th was somehow incorrect or made up. I mean, she has a lot of credibility based on her background, based on her role within the White House. I think that, again, there could be quibbles about details, but really that narrative and that picture is out there.
Brandon, what do you think?
The reality is no one wants to hear it. That testimonial was awful. But the reality is, again, we're looking at the woulda, shoulda, coulda, hearsay. Most Americans are not focused on that. They're focused on the gas pumps. They're focused on the grocery stores. They're focused on the baby formula that they still can't get. That's what matters, not January 6th.
Amin Mohseni, what's your view on where this will go?
Well, I think the global supply problems is going to continue given the war that's happening and also the pandemic. So for the next 2 to 3 years, we are going to have inflation above 5% certainly, and it's not going to go down by any measures that Fed takes. And so moving forward, I think what we are going to see is a form of kind of a stagflation that we had in 1980s in U.S. again. That higher rates of inflation and also recession, that's going to put the Fed and also the administration in a very tough position to be able to get the economy back on track. So I think moving forward for the 2024 elections and also the midterms that are coming up, the administration is going to have a tough time trying to convince Americans that the economy is going to be on the right track.
But see, I think that the economy is a factor. I don't think it's the factor. I think that you've got a lot going on here at this moment in history and a lot of things that are beyond President Biden's control, but a lot of facts that are coming about the presumptive, at this point, nominee for the Republican Party in 2024, the self-described kingmaker, the self-described person who has to grant his permission for people to run for the House and the Senate. I think it's going to matter. I mean, is it the only factor in the 2024 elections and the 2022 midterms? No, but it is a factor. And one of the things we can all agree on is that no one knows how this is all going to play out. No one knows what surprise witnesses January 6th might hold. And no one knows to the degree that this is going to be something that will keep centrist voters, that will keep moderate voters, people who may vote Republican from time to time, from recoiling and saying, well, I really don't want to vote for the party of that guy who tried to choke the Secret Service agent and the Supreme Court justices who made abortion illegal. There are many, many factors here. I don't think anyone stands above all the others because there are so many factors here that affect other people's lives that we just can't predict how voters are going to react to.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's our show for this evening. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.